Hello and welcome to Read. Today I want to talk about Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon. I've had the pleasure of spending the last month reading this book, and the eagle-eyed amongst you will probably have noticed that the title of this video is a little bit different, as seems to keep on happening with reading Thomas Pynchon's books, especially his mega novels. This is just my first thoughts and comments because there's so much in this book. This book is, epic in all senses of the word. But I still wanted to come and talk about how much I enjoyed it and what my experience was and how much I recommend it. And if you're going to choose a Pynchon mega novel to read, I highly recommend starting with Mason and Dixon, because even though I think it is just as virtuosic and just as great as Gravity's Rainbow, I think the fact that it centers on the characters of Mason and Dixon help guide a reader through, and especially if you're American, there's going to be a lot more that you're going to know, and so that kind of leads into my experience and what I came to the book with. I'm not American, and all I've done is sort of read quite a few of Pynchon's other books. I knew that Mason and Dixon were real people. I thought they were American, and also I knew that something that they did together resulted in the Mason-Dixon line, which is a boundary or a border line in America. And I knew that the book was written in 18th century vernacular. I had no idea what the Mason-Dixon line was. I didn't know anything else. I didn't look it up beforehand because I did want to go into the book without any macro spoilers. And so on the one hand, I'm glad for that because I didn't get any macro spoilers, and I think that I was almost a sort of great subject for how Pynchon wanted to tell the story. But on the opposite side, I was a little bit, like the John Travolta Pulp Fiction meme for a lot of it, where characters would just be introduced, and if you were an American, you would immediately intuit that, oh, Franklin is Benjamin Franklin, but I don't know that. I don't know who Franklin is. When I saw Emerson, at first you thought, wait, is that Ralph Waldo Emerson? But then no, but that's the only Emerson I know, and it's actually William Emerson. So if you're American and if you understand the Mason-Dixon line, the history of the Mason-Dixon line, which, after reading the book, I did go and look it up and got this idea that it was sort of the first boundary or the boundary line of free states and slave states. And I think that that was kind of it was almost the, how do I say this? Like, I'm proud of myself because I realized that that's sort of what Dixon did and what Pynchon did. And I'm going to get a little bit more into this when I talk about the use of the N-word or the stark absence of the N-word in this novel. But I think that what Pynchon maybe set out to do, and what he, in my opinion, really succeeded in doing, is telling this beautiful Bond story of these comrades, Mason and Dixon, going through kind of being introduced. They get introduced by these like funny letters in the second chapter or the second episode of the book, and then it's just their entire story going through until the end of the book. And while they're on their rollicking adventures through, Dutch colonies, and then in the biggest section of the book, part 2, entitled America, them going through and actually making the Mason-Dixon line, you're getting fun interludes of jokes and comedy and slapstick humor. All the while, Pynchon is throwing in comments like, oh, here's another massacre of Native Americans, and here's another example of slavery, or like abuses of people through slavery that's going on. And so it's kind of, I got the impression that Pynchon was trying to write this book that just had these two like bumbling buffoons that and it really helped that they were English, they were not American, just going through, making their line, doing their job, all the while the intense history of America is going on in the background. And just going through, after finishing the book, I just went and reread a summary of every single chapter, and if you just read those summary chapters on paper, you would think that the book was much darker and much more intense and serious than it actually is. And I think that that's exactly what Pynchon set out to do, to make it this sort of optimistic or this really light representation of it, but really without diminishing it at all. Like, he's not hiding anything that's going on. He's not he's not making light of any of the tragedies or the travesties. He's just only showing it from these two people's perspective. And it really, I can see, I think, why Pynchon gravitated toward the figures of Mason and Dixon, especially considering some of his other, the other characters in his picaresque novels, like, is it Benny Profane from V, and of course Slothrop from Gravity's Rainbow. Just this idea of the kind of stumbling Charlie Chaplin-esque character moving through this intense world around them. I can definitely see why Pynchon gravitated towards Mason and Dixon. I've spent a lot of time praising the prelude of the novel. Let's start talking about a couple of things. I'm going to read extracts to give you an idea of the prose. There is one late stage chapter that I do want to talk about, even though it is a spoiler. I'm going to give some warnings beforehand, but it is such a good chapter that for those who have read it and who are going to stay and actually watch that section of the video, I just want to gush about it with you all, because it was really like a put the book aside and cry for 30 seconds sort of moment. And yeah, I'll just talk about some of the concepts and some of the themes that I really liked. I'm going to start again, actually, what I might be able to do before I lead into that is just finish off that point I was making about the use of the N-word, or the lack of it. Because when you're reading old novels like this and set in this time, you kind of got to just take a deep breath and say, okay, yeah, we're going to have to sit through and read, some pretty vile shit. But there's only one use of the N-word in this novel, and it occurs in a bar or in like a drinking setting, and the guy who says it is like lambasted by everybody else around him, saying, we don't want to hear that sort of language. And I think that was just that was one of the triggers for me for noticing what Pynchon was doing, making a mockery of those people by just only having one use of the N-word in this 18th century American novel that is focused around a borderline being established between free and slave states, and there's only one instance of someone saying the N-word. That was something that was a kind of clue for noticing what Pynchon was doing in this book. In classic Pynchon style, so at early stages of early episodes, we get introduced to Mason and Dixon. They meet each other. Mason is an astronomer and Dixon is a surveyor, and so they first do some work in other British, Dutch colony places. They go somewhere. I'm blanking on exactly where they are. I'll put it as a little note in the corner. But they go and they're staying with the Vrooms, the Vroom family, and I believe it is in a Dutch colony. And there is a kind of, it's kind of like a funny, licentious scene where the matriarch and the sorority of the Vrooms are all flirting with Mason, and kind of teasing him and like trying to seduce him, basically. Mason, meanwhile, is mourning the death of his wife Rebecca, and he is kind of plagued with this melancholy that really stays with him for the duration of the novel. And I'll get more into that later, but there's I think the power that Pynchon has, and why I think he's such a good writer. And another way that something a lot of people talk about is how Pynchon will talk about deep themes, but he will not kind of loom over you or say, I'm the big wise author who knows about these themes and I have to educate you, the reader. He's always there with you when he's introducing these themes, and so there's a sort of kinship, I think, that you get when you read Pynchon. And the reason I mention this is because there's a very in this scene with the family, with the Vroom family, it contrasts something that happens in Vineland, or there's a similar a similar kind of twist or turn. With the Vroom family, the reason that they are seducing him, which we find out maybe a page or two after some really funny, like, you know, almost leaping out of a second story window to get away from these women. Mason wakes up in the morning and finds a naked slave in his bed, and the slave explains to him, you know, make no mistake, these women are seducing you without any intention of actually sleeping with you. They simply want to make you like raise your libido, make you horny so that you impregnate me. They're going to take my half-caste baby that is going to have fairer skin, and they're going to get a better price on the slave market. And it's just this really intense turn for Mason, who's starts to see some of the really bad kind of actions and so on about slavery, but also for the reader, where we realize pretty early on, this is in chapter 7 of a nearly 80 chapter book, that Pynchon is not afraid to pull punches, but he's not going to be like I said, the sort of loomy, judgmental author about it. And the reason why I mention Vineland is because I think that there's a similar setup punchline moment in that book, but it almost feels like Pynchon got it the wrong way around in Vineland, such that it's stuck out a lot more. And I talked about this in my Vineland video, but there's a scene in Vineland where a character is following a kind of detective mystery trail, and in order to, you know, follow all of the paths, she goes through a human trafficking ring, and it's this really just, obviously it's a terrible situation, but there's this kind of absurd moment where the main character at the time comes across this woman who is in this sex trafficking situation, who is treating it like a beauty pageant, because she's saying, you know, you gotta decorate yourself up, you gotta make yourself sellable, because this person is trying to at least get them out of these situations and into you know, these like at least being sold to someone so that they're not still essentially prisoners. But it's this really kind of intense it's very shocking. It's almost like a kind of jump scare when that happens in Vineland. And I remember thinking that it was so I remember thinking that it was the sort of thing that almost could have been pulled off in Gravity's Rainbow, but it stuck out a lot more in Vineland, because Vineland in general wasn't as absurd as Gravity's Rainbow. But I think that where Pynchon had this setting up an environment and then a turn or a reveal, it was pulled off so well in Mason and Dixon, and it made me realize exactly why I didn't quite resonate with the example in Vineland, because in Mason and Dixon it starts positive and then there's a serious turn, and it's like a stand-up comedian sort of doing a joke and then kind of saying something that makes you realize, like, oh shit, this is a real thing that they're really talking about, and he seduced you in with comedy, but then he's gonna let the truth digest. Whereas with Vineland, that example, he'd already kind of introduced the truth of the sex trafficking, and then kind of tried to make a joke out of it, which almost could have worked if it was done in the reverse order. But yeah, needless to say, it was done well in Mason and Dixon. So maybe now's the best time to start reading some extracts, just to give you an idea of the prose, because afterwards I'm going to talk about a concept, the missing 11 days, and then I'm going to jump into the chapter 59, which is the tearjerker chapter. Just to give you an idea of how Pynchon wrote this novel and how absolutely delightful it can be to read, even if you kind of have no idea what's going on. The year after Rebecca's death was treacherous ground for Mason, who was as apt to cross impulsively by ferry into the bosom of, I think, whapping, and another night of joyless low debauchery as to attend routs in Chelsea, where nothing was available betwixt eye flirtation and the pox. In lower situated imitations of the Hellfire Club, he hurtled carelessly along some of lust's less frequented footpaths. Ever further, he did not escape noting, from pleasure, the moonlight falling upon the lawns, the trees, the walks, claiming the colour of desire, as to represent all that passion seething within that small corner of town, the music through the leaves, each washed in moon white, to the fabulators of Grub Street, a licentious night world of rakes and whores, surviving only in memories of pleasure, small darting winged beings, untrustworthy as remembrances, yet its infected, fragrant, soiled encounters neath the moon were as worthy as any, an evil in innocence. And then there's an interruption with the kids because the entire story is being narrated by a Reverend Wicks Cherrycoke, who is almost a... Wicks Cherrycoke to Mason and Dixon is sort of Boswell to Samuel Johnson. Give you another example of an extract. This is from earlier, by the way, and this is from... let me just confirm, but I believe it is... Yeah, so this is from the chapter of the Vroom family where Mason wakes up to notice the slave in his bed. In Johanna's intrigue to bring together Mason and her senior slave, however, 'tis the slavery, not any form of desire, that is of the essence. Dixon, out of these particular meshes, can see it. Mason cannot. Indifferent to visibility, wrapped in the melancholy winds that choir all night long, persists an obsession or siege by something much older than anyone here, an injustice that will not cancel out. Men of reason will define a ghost as nothing more otherworldly than a wrong unrighted, which, like an uneasy spirit, cannot move on. Needing help we cannot usually give, nor always find the people it needs to see, or who need to see it. But here is the collective ghost of more than household scale, the wrongs committed daily against the slaves, petty and grave ones alike, going unrecorded, charmed invisible to history, invisible yet possessing mass and velocity, able not only to rattle chains but to break them as well. The precariousness of life here, the need to keep the ghost propitiated day to day via the company's merciless priesthoods and many-volumed codes, brings all but the hardiest souls sooner or later to consider the primary questions more or less undiluted. Slaves here commit suicide at a frightening rate, but so do the whites, for no reason, or for a reason ubiquitous and unaddressed, which may bear acquaintance but a moment of time. Mason, as he comes to recognize the sorrowful nakedness of the arrangements here, grows remorse, while Dixon makes a point of treating slaves with a courtesy he is never quite able to summon for their masters. So, just some examples of how Pynchon is able to use the fact that Mason and Dixon are British to kind of comment on like their opinions of slavery, and this gets even more critical when they move into America. And this was something I really loved. I loved just this image. Quite a bit later, when they're in America. Acts have consequences, Dixon, they must. These louts believe all's right now, that they are free to get on with their lives, that to them are no doubt important, with no glimmer at all of the debt they have taken on. This is what I smelled, Leith water. One of the things the newly born forget is how terrible its taste and smell. In time, these people are able to forget everything. Be willing but to wait a little, and ye may gull them again and again, however ye wish, even unto their own dissolution. In America, as I apprehend, time is the true river that runs round hell. And last section that I want to talk about, last extract that I want to read, this is when Mason and Dixon are with a kind of leader of a Native American group, and I love that he calls them defecates with pigeons. But anyway, I'm going to read this extract for you, and then I'm going to talk about the last section, which is going to lead into a little bit of a spoiler, but here's this last extract. Listen to me, defecates with pigeons. Long before any of you came here, we dreamed of you. All the people, even nations far to the south and the west, dreamt you before ever we saw you. We believed that you came from some other world or the sky. You had powers and we respected them. Yet you never dreamed of us, and when at last you saw us, wished only to destroy us. Then the killing started. Some of you, some of us, but not nearly as many as we'd been expecting. You could not be the giants of long ago who would simply have wiped us away and for less. Instead, you sold us your powers, your rifles, as if encouraging us to shoot at you. And so we did, though not hitting as many of you as you were expecting. Now you begin to believe that we have come from elsewhere, possessing powers you do not. Those of us who knew how have fled into refuge in your dreams at last. Though we now pursue real lives no different at their hearts from yours, we are also your dreams. That is just a freaking incredible insight, I think, that Pynchon included in here. I'm going to talk really quickly, maybe from here, somewhat spoiler alerts, until time code that I will mention in the that I'll put up. Something that I really liked is that so early on, I believe it is in episode 19, they start talking about the lost 11 days. And those 11 days are from when they moved, or from when America moved from the, the West, I think Britain moved from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. And as a result, in September, they lost 11 days. If I remember correctly, they went from the 3rd of September to the 14th of September. And early on, there's a whole rant about this. There is like this big old conversation about with these guys in a bar. They're talking about the idea of, time being taken from them. They're debating whether they're technically older or technically younger. And this all has a giant payoff in episode 56, which I'll just read the first sentence or two to set it up for you, and then talk about what happened. Mason, for a while, had presumed it but a matter of confusing dates, which are names, with days, which are real things. Yet for anyone he met born before 52 and alive after it, the missing 11 days arose again and again in conversation, sooner or later characterized as brute absence or a tear through the fabric of life. The more he wrestled with the question, the more the advantage shifted toward a belief, as he would tell Dixon one day, in a slowly rotating loop, or if you like, vortex of 11 days, tangent to the linear path of what we imagine as ordinary time, but excluded from it and repeating itself without end. So for Mason, he understands that time, instead of just going like normal, there is a little bit of a 11-day loop, and that loops, infinitely forever. And for everyone who thought of days as dates, they just followed the line normally, because it doesn't matter what we call tomorrow. It could be the 15th, or it could be whatever. We're just moving into that next. We're moving into a unit of time, and we're calling it a certain thing. But Mason kind of treated each day as a real thing, and so there was no way he couldn't go from 3 to 14. He had to go from 3 to 4. And chapter 56 describes Mason going around that loop where everyone else jumped straight from 3rd to 14. And it is an intellectually just mind-boggling concept, because everyone who believed that the dates would just change just went straight away to him, and every single animal that was like a close companion, like a cat or like a dog or a domesticated cat, went forward with everybody. But all of the life forms and all of the animals and everything that people don't notice in every day, that are the sort of left behinds, they stayed with Mason in this 11-day loop. And so he went through this 11-day loop and describes it as this hellhole of just, completely barren, absent, no human life is there, only the hellspawn that we don't notice in everyday life, like, bats and other creepy crawlies, were with him, and he wasn't able to sleep for this whole time. He goes to a library to try and study and learn about it, and he's sensing that there's other sentient life there, but he can't see it, or he's not registering where they are. And then eventually he goes all the way back around, he loops, he enters the 14th at the where everybody else just instantly jumped, and he sees his wife, Rebecca, and the only comment she makes is, "Oh, looks like you had a long night out." And then, talking to Dixon, Mason says, in his melancholy, he says, "Now that Rebecca is dead, all of my life is those 11 days until I see her again." And man. Anyway, that was just such a whew. So that's all I wanted to talk about. It's not spoiler section anymore. Thank you for watching me talk about just some general impressions of Mason and Dixon. Question. I wonder whether or not I'm going to reread this or Gravity's Rainbow first. I think I'll reread parts of Gravity's Rainbow, but if I was to do a full read of a book, I would probably reread Mason and Dixon again. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video.